Right? No, it's just exciting. Shaun, you're free to begin whenever.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. Let me turn on the slideshow here. And so I might have trouble if you raise your hand. I probably won't see that far. So please speak up if you have questions. I'm Shaun Jamison. This is Creating and Navigating Uniform Curriculum. Little background on me. I'm an associate dean. I work for Perdue Global Law School and have for 25 years. If that doesn't sound familiar, we used to be Concord Law School. So we've been entirely online the entire time that we've been in existence for now about 27, 28 years. I did get a PhD in education, mostly online. There were residency requirements, so I viewed the uniform curriculum from a student point of view as well. And actually, um, since I originally had this presentation, I'm also taking classes as a student in another school at the university. All this to say, I do know a thing or two about it, but I also want to reassure you that I understand that your context, your school's goals, the characteristics of the administration, the faculty, all might be different. So it's a matter of kind of translating my experience into what'll work for you. So a little definition, just this is what I made up, but some level of uniformity and expected outcomes in design. So there's definitely a spectrum when you're talking about uniform curriculum. So some of the aspects of that might include having a uniform syllabus structure, and having policies have a uniform structure. In other words, the way they're laid out. Standardized document formatting, common learning objectives across sections. That's kind of what kicked off the whole idea for the presentation. Common learning objects, which is fancy edu speak, so I'll explain that in a little bit. In what I call largely designed multi-section courses, which may or may not be for you. That is actually what we do. So syllabus structure and policy. So I kind of want to start small. And what I mean by syllabus structure, so everybody has a syllabus, right, per class. It may be like one that came from your school, but the professor fills in the details, or it might be more detailed. Or sometimes you have a separate, what you call like a course guide or course outline that goes into a lot more detail, getting into what are the readings, what happens on week what, and all of that. So it's different from school to school, but the general concept is the same. It's a roadmap for the students to understand what's going to happen in the class and what the expectations and rules for them are. So what I'm suggesting here is that even though syllabi will vary from class to class, if you don't have a uniform approach to them, I suggest that it'd be a really good idea. So in other words, on each syllabus, there's a place for the late policy. On each syllabus, there's a place for the course description, who's teaching it, what the course objectives are, all those kinds of things, what book is assigned, that kind of thing. And the advantage there is kind of a concept, related to universal design, where it's accessible to the students because they're not spending time looking at one syllabus for one class, having to figure that one out, going to the next one. And not only does it have different information, which is okay, right? But it's actually displayed in a different way, which is frustrating for students. So you might be thinking in the back of your mind, it's like, well, we're teaching them to read complicated and awful documents. Isn't that a skill that they're going to have to learn anyway? But I feel that when you look at things that are quote unquote administrative for the students, I feel they should be easy, right? It should be very uniform, very slick, very easy to understand. What am I expected to do? What what classroom does this meet in? What days? What's the late policy? What how much is each assignment worth? All that kind of stuff should be very easy to see and laid out in a very similar way. And so the advantage really is that accessibility for students. um, just to give you a little background, my students tend to be their average age 43. They're almost always working full time. So we're very much, most of our students are part-time students. And about a third of them have graduate degrees. So they don't have trouble reading generally, but they're tired. And so having something that's very accessible and very straightforward to read is super helpful. It's also, ease of administration. So I happen to be administrator. So when students are mad, I might end up talking to them. And it's easier for me to look at a person's syllabus and say, okay, here's how we communicated to you what the expectations were. Um, and also it's easier to hold them accountable, right? So I thought the late policy was the same as the other course. Well, it's not. It's right here. It's very easy to find. And students tend to be more satisfied. And this will be a theme that I kind of hit throughout the presentation is finding out what the students really like and want. You might be surprised. We actually find that students like uniformity, or at least our students do, and things that we think are completely within the faculty bailiwick and that we're not going to touch as administration. Students think we should just take over and make them do it a certain way. So students, definitely like uniformity. They like predictability. So you'd be surprised if there are things that you're not making uniform now that you could. I'd ask the students what they think, because if they're anything like ours, they're going to like it. And of course, you always want students what you expected them to. So if you have a how you want that course to be conducted, and that's again in a part of the syllabus that's easy to find because it's clearly labeled. It's labeled the same way it is in every other course, even if it's slightly different in that course, then they'll understand the expectations. It's like, oh, we have an attendance policy in this class and there's points attached to it. And here's the behavior that we look at for the rubric to decide whether you get the participation points or not. Really easy for them to see. Documents, standardized document formatting. And again, you might have this and not even know it if you're faculty. If you have really good administrative support and they're just doing all the stuff for you, you just hand it over to them and they hand it back. In my reality, I don't have administrative support, except that I have a whole department of curriculum people that when things go online, they're very vetted and very, accessible and ADA compliant and everything. But the idea behind a standardized document format is that it is going to be ADA compliant. So if there's, a title has to be put in a certain way, certain fonts have to be used, all those kinds of things. If people understand what those expectations are, then that's really helpful, especially if you are lucky enough to have administrative support that you can run that through. To have them be uniform, certainly having uniform branding, have that school pride on there, or if you have a format or a logo or something that you want people to use. And again, it all goes back to user experience. So if I, as a student, can reliably know documents will be formatted a certain way, and that helps with usability. And of course, disadvantages, always, if you have a new policy, it's like, how do you enforce it? People feel like it's limiting their creativity or it's just slowing them down, or they just don't like to change. That's fine too. But I have to think most of the time it's just that people don't know, right? Oh, I didn't really think or realize that, that a PDF has to be has to be accessible, right? It has to be ADA compliant. Or I didn't know that people really wanted me to use the brand or a certain font or something like that for consistency. So a lot of times it's just not been communicated or the decision's never been made. So I think people get on board once they understand the purpose of something, and the value. So this is what actually kicked off my desire to have this session, is the idea of common learning objectives or outcomes. And the idea is to have those at least for the bar courses across the board. To have a situation where you've looked at your program level objectives. So that's on your website. It says at the XYZ School of Law, we teach these 7 things, and we guarantee that students who graduate will have these attributes. And then you look and see, okay, looking down at a specific course, especially one that's bar tested, how do the objectives in that class play up to those program objectives, and how do they support professional competence in that area and bar passage? And so it's very general, so it's not really like, being prescriptive about how exactly a course is taught. So for example, if you had something in contracts that said, student will analyze the elements of a contract in the context of a breach or something like that. Well, that could be tested through an essay, and the class could be taught through a traditional Socratic method, or the class could be more of a contract drafting oriented class where they do a lot of reading in context to be able to do that analysis. So, having those objectives really doesn't have to be overly prescriptive or infringing on academic freedom or creativity. I mean, depending again on what your goals are. We actually have all of the sections of a course of contracts are have the same basic content in them at our school, but that might not be right for what you want to do. So that's one way it can be still, flexible enough that allows people freedom, but still make sure that, those things that you absolutely want to make sure that students have for contracts, for torts, for criminal law, for civil procedure, for constitutional law, that you don't want them graduating from your law school without knowing those things. You have them in there as objectives, and it's across sections. And even though it might be taught differently, it's measured to that objective. And it can really help you, again, have that minimum floor, help you with bar passage, help you with employer expectations if you happen to have like an advisory council, or you regularly talk to employers about what they're hoping to see out of students. Maybe it's not realistic what they're expecting, but you can at least try to meet it. But it's always good to hear what they have to say. So if you're standardizing, again, what's your goal? So what do you want to have the students know and do? Clarify flexibility versus requirements. This is kind of talking about, obviously you have to have faculty involved anyway, but say a decision is finally made after consulting with faculty and going through all the right committees and the votes and everything. So I read this book years ago, and it was leadership, or it might have been CEO or something. They were very popular for a while. CEO lessons from the Marine Corps. And one of the things was making sure that people understood when something was open for debate and when it became in order, right? So at some point, the school agrees on what they're going to do and what parts are flexible and which ones are now requirements. Because that can be very frustrating for faculty and course designers if they don't understand where the boundaries are. Obviously, I kind of this should have been at the top, but engaging faculty, because those are your subject matter experts, and the people that are right in the front lines and best understand what your particular demographic of students want and need, right? What your target employers want and need. And of course, go ahead and design the outcomes. I won't dig into Bloom's taxonomy today. And of course, thinking about what were those high level programmatic goals? What are your course specific goals? So again, and some of them can be like sometimes the programmatic goals are just rewritten a little bit for the course specific. So like a programmatic goal might be, writes professionally in a manner, appropriate for an attorney or something like that. That's probably a little too vague, but then you might modify that for contracts or for torts or for criminal law. And finally, I think under this topic, I always want to make sure that when we're talking about making things uniform or having policies, because it is a good thing for the students, but always that pedagogy needs to win, right? Which means the students win. So if you have a policy that you want to roll out, but it really just doesn't work for a course, accept the course out of the policy if that's justified, right? Um, it's always about what's the best teaching, what's going to do best for the students so that they can be the best lawyer or whatever their goal for going to law school is. Common learning objects. So for those of you that are not into EduSpeak, those are just, pieces of a course, like quizzes and lectures and things like that. Now, some of you teach on ground exclusively, and some of you teach maybe in a blended or even an online setting. So not all this will apply exactly. So I'm entirely online. So everything is online for me. But you can use things in common whether you're on ground and face to face as well. So if you have, let's say you have 4 sections of contracts going at the same time, if you all give the quizzes on the same night, you can use the same quiz. And you're like, oh gosh, well, the students will cheat, right? I mean, that's always always a possibility. But the benefit to that is that you can collaborate with the other faculty and vet those tests to get them as valid as possible. And if there is a problem, you can correct it for all of those quizzes at the same time. And the students' grades will be as close as possible in as far as fairness, as far as difficulty and subject matter tested as possible. So, they did have a different faculty member, so they were taught a little differently maybe. But it really can help with calibrating the grading. This all, because of course, assumes that you have interim assessments. I hope you do. And then, same with tests, maybe if you're doing an interim essay or something like that, sharing that information, collaborating with other faculty members, so that you have something that's, maybe a better quality product than you could have done yourself. And then if you feel bad because you didn't write your own test, just write an extra one in case that one is somehow compromised. You need one in a hurry, for sure. Another learning object is lectures. Sometimes, for on ground, we give them in person. Sometimes we do that flipped classroom where the students watch the lectures on their own time and they come to class ready to do something, right? Break off into groups, role play, call and answer, hypos, draft live, something very interactive because they've already done the didactic piece. They did the reading, they listened to the lecture, they took notes. Now they're ready to perform those skills. So you can do that, on ground or online, either way. So we actually pre-record our lecture portion, the static portion, so that's already in the course room. But you can naturally do that, and you can share those between professors, right? If you're comfortable doing that. I know some people would never want somebody else's video in there, but some people are really good and they work very, very hard on those lectures. And you can spend your time doing other things. And you can share hypos and exercises, between courses. That's awfully helpful sometimes. A lot of times for adjuncts, especially when they're new, I supply them with hypos and slides to use for their live interaction. And some people use them and some people don't, right? Some people are like, oh, I'd rather use my hypo or, and that's just fine. But the idea is that you can share it across and it helps to know that if it is something that as a course chair, you really want people to use, you need to, of course, tell them that. But it's nice that the students might have been exposed to the same hypo. In learning activities is something, again, sometimes we do those breakout groups online. I'll have them do a negotiation or something like that. It requires some effort to put that together. There's especially if it's not being graded, it's kind of nice. Again, you're sharing the load a little bit with your fellow professors. Say, oh, I wrote this great, small group activity, and you can share that across and, and work it and rework it until it gets really good. So there's definite advantages. It definitely for rubrics. Again, universal design, try to have your rubrics look the same across the school. But also if you're testing to that common learning objective, having the same rubric, if possible, would really help the students know what they're being tested on. Yeah, so advantages, measurement, definitely, because I'm nerding out on the numbers as a administrator. If I do have things that I know they're done similarly or the same way or portions of it in courses, I can use that to help measure my success. Improving bar passage, quality control, and definitely adjunct workload. Some people love to put 100 hours into being an adjunct. And they just throw themselves into it and they're getting paid, they probably figure $3 an hour or something. But a lot of folks are really busy. They enjoy doing the adjuncting, but they really don't want to build a course from the bottom up. And so having these common learning objects, even if they're going to replace them after the first time they teach them, it definitely helps them get launched, and it definitely helps them see the model of what you're hoping to see as a school from an adjunct or as a department chair or as a course lead. This is kind of how I designed the course, is hoping it would go this way. They can see that. And then if they need to change it later because they brought their own experience and hypos and everything, that's great. But they at least got started. All right, so this is what we do at Purdue Global. I'll call them largely design because there's always room for creativity. But we put an entire course kind of in the can before the term starts. And that's because we're entirely online and we want the students to be able to plan. Again, they're average age 43, they're working full time, they have kids and elderly parents and all these things going on. And some of you will have some of the same kinds of challenges for your students. So we need to have that course designed in a reliable way for for them to know, okay, this is what's going to happen generally in this course. During this week, my workload is going to be heavier. They actually know all that stuff. We tell them in advance, right? There's going to be what we estimate to be a 10-hour project in week 11 or something like that. So we design the heck out of those courses. And they go through quite a quality control process. We have editors, the deans look at the courses. The faculty checks what everybody else did to their course. They get feedback from other people that teach the course when they're the subject matter expert. So it goes through a lot of quality control. So it's obviously easier to do online, um, because it exists in a specific place, right? So negative is less flexibility. So once you've largely designed an online course, it's really hard to say, oh, we're just going to have, week 4 and week 8. That's probably not going to work so great. So if adjunct or another full-time faculty member is teaching the course really disagrees with the structure, that can create some friction there. Obviously, higher quality control, definitely project management. Making sure that the course is ready to go at the right time. Having expert assistants. Hopefully, you have people that have some background in curriculum that can help. It's wonderful. And the upside and downside is you got updated all the time, right? So if you're an on ground faculty member and only you know what's in your notes, right? So you go in and at the end of the term, you go through and you revise your lecture notes and everything. Um, and it's something that's completely in your control. If it exists on a LMS, somebody has to change that and make sure it's updated and current, and the lessons learned from the prior term have been incorporated into the design. And of course, always really important to explain flexibility. So, like I said, largely designed, not completely designed. So I know some people that teach online courses only have, like discussion boards for interaction. We do have live sessions, so that's where a lot of flexibility comes in. The faculty members, because the course is largely designed, right? The quizzes and the lectures were already put together. They can spend more time on grading and individual feedback, talking students off the ledge. I assume you experience that at all of your schools as well. So it's much more about a mentoring and feedback um, relationship, but also practical skills focus, right? Less didactic time and more skills time. So who all do we have to worry about? You probably know all this. We want to get faculty involved in decision-making process early and really driving it because they're best positioned to know what the students want. Administration, if you have to worry about a board, you may or may not need that. If you have curriculum or media support, they're great because they know the latest on what is accessible or what is best received by students. Any governance structure issues, committees you need to go to. Certainly talking to students. Again, I think you'd be surprised if you propose to students and say, hey, we were thinking about making this kind of document uniform, or we were thinking about having, um, probably don't want to tell them you have the same quizzes in each section, but it's some other thing like, oh, we're going to share lectures, even though Professor X is teaching the class, Professor Y's lecture will be part of the flipped classroom. You know, how do you feel about that? Would that be a concern for you? It'd be interesting to hear what they have to say. And certainly what employers would think. Obviously, we care about accreditors because they hold a lot of power over us. So technology we might use, a learning management system, LMS, depending on, I think almost everybody uses some kind of online element now to help manage, even if it's for document sharing and things like that. Highly recommend an online grade book. It's a little bit of a freak out if you haven't used it before, because you get your first assignment back. If you do badly, all of a sudden you have an F and or a D in the course and you're freaking out. And it's like, okay, but that's only 20 points out of 1,000, so calm down. So if your students haven't seen that before and you start doing it, just be aware that yeah, kind of have to prepare them for that. But LMS is great for document sharing, and having one LMS for school, please. If you don't, please encourage your administration do that because you don't want students to have to learn a bunch of different software for no reason. Um, for sure. And you don't want to have to, like, if you're doing document sharing and one person's using Google Docs and the other person's using Microsoft 365 or something, it's just frustrating, right? So we try to have some uniformity in the software. Video is great. It's fantastic. Um, you can even, if you do have online quizzes, even for your on-ground classes, they can be adaptive, or they can at least work out of a pool, so it makes it harder for them to cheat. Anytime you look at technology, look at accessibility, easy use, reliability, and I forgot one on there, portability, right? Make sure if you have your stuff in some kind of tech that you can get it out and reuse it if you stop using that tech. And then as an administrator, I love the back office stuff, right? Measurement, are the students, are they logging in? When did they log in? When are they doing things? How are they scoring? All of that kind of stuff. Fantastic. All right. So overall recap, think about what your school's goal is. Think about the program goals. Those are the ones in your catalog or on your website. What did you promise those students would learn? Getting that faculty input, and probably have to go through governance process anyway. Student input and gathering data about their performance. Running a pilot, you might already have people, even if you don't do this, you probably have people who do things a little differently. So gathering up information about what they're doing. And naturally always revising, right? We are never done. Um, but having some things uniform makes it a little easier to do that day of gathering, a little easier to know, oh, well, this policy isn't that hot. It really wasn't working. Or this way of teaching the students in this course just wasn't landing anymore. The students we had 10 years ago, they were fine. This group to this year, they're not getting it. We got to do something different. So I'm getting in there and revising. So it's not a one-time deal. It's definitely something that you have to change. So that's my email, sjamison@PerdueGlobal.edu. Um, so what I should say that I didn't say at the beginning, this was originally a 15-minute presentation. I knew it'd take me about a half an hour, so I'm grateful that it wasn't limited to 15 minutes. But I'm happy to take your questions. We might need somebody to bring a microphone over. I'm not sure. And if we get done early, I'm told by Kelly that's just fine. But I'm happy to stay and take your comments or your questions.
It should pick it up in the room, so yeah, go ahead.
Do you find, it sounds like you have a lot of adjuncts in your program. Do you think it's easier for you to implement because you have more of an adjunct faculty as opposed to faculty who might have other kinds of status and are maybe more resistant to being told what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. That is completely a factor, right? You have to operate in the context of the school that you're in. So I think that's part of it, and part of it too is about, I don't know, maybe half of us full-time people were there for like a couple decades, and so we kind of grew up with this school, so we're kind of used to how it operates, and we're comfortable with that. So um, really for us, the full-time people are probably actually a little more on board even than the adjuncts. I think the reason the adjuncts don't push back on us is they're just busy. They actually seems like they want more support rather than less, but I fully understand that it's a heavier lift usually with your tenured faculty and being accustomed to doing things a certain way. So it's a longer haul, but I think it's really worth having the conversation.
Hey, John. Oh, I'm gonna follow up on her question a little bit. Do you do training of when you hire new adjuncts, and is that a course? Or is that a series of videos? And same question for students. Do you do like a training in how to use the system or an orientation? That's canned or that's live?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I'll answer the faculty first. So we're very fortunate. We use the same LMS as the university. So I used to have to, I had a whole separate course that I designed to train my faculty, but now we're all on the same LMS. So the university actually does the initial training for me, which is largely online, but they do a training on how to use Zoom and how to teach a class and what the university expectations are for that. Because every Zoom is like set up, instances are set up a little differently. So it's nice to have that training. Um, and then they come over to me, and then I have a series of videos, and then we have a process of mentoring and evaluation, and kind of helping them to launch in. The students do less training, I think, because we're hoping that the technology is designed better for students, right? Because they're the customer. So they have an orientation course that they go through, with some live classes, where they're interacting, but they're also practicing using the platform. They're practicing getting into the Zoom. They're practicing uploading a document and things like that. So they seem fairly prepared, but we do as a school. So that's a university does that for us, and then as a school, then we'll do additional training with students and email campaigns and things like that. Uh, but yeah, it's definitely there's a lot of thought put into it. Some of the faculty members come, and if they've taught on Blackboard or Vista or whatever, some other platform, we're using Brightspace D2L. It's super easy to learn from the other. And I should say that we actually have a staff that does all the settings and the setup for the courses. So those of you who've been around online LMSs for a long time, you were probably running your own course and doing all the HTML and everything. We don't expect that anymore. It's much more professionalized. There's a curriculum staff that sets the course up, and so the faculty member is basically an advanced user. They're not actually programming anything.
So you mentioned that you tend to have older students and they like the syllabus because the same information is in the same place for every course. How do you get them to read the syllabus in the first place?
Sorry. That is an excellent question. In interesting, it's also the syllabus is in the same place in the course room. So if you're online, that's one advantage there too. Yeah, so there are some strategies around that. So if you're doing if your class have a class that's on a Zoom or a video, you can actually do a field trip and take them there and talk to them about it. Um, but in theory, I don't think I do this anymore, but I used to actually have like a little quiz that was a syllabus quiz in some classes. So, but we definitely have like they have to check off on the honor code and stuff like that. There's actually I agree that I read the honor code. But yeah, it's an excellent question, right? It's a universal frustration of faculty that people aren't reading the syllabi. But we do spend some time in each course, doing some orientation at the beginning, especially pointing out anything that is unusual or different, because it can be. Some courses are very much simulation courses. That's going to be a very different feel from a traditional doctrinal class, and it'll have different rules of the road. And it's important that they understand. So I don't have a magic answer, unfortunately, but I think a syllabus quiz might be good, and certainly a tour of the syllabus helps.
Thank you.
So you mentioned constantly revising it. I was wondering if there's a schedule where you go through and do sort of a wholesale revision. If there's a period of time that you go back and look and say, maybe we need to redo our objectives. Maybe we need to think about new objects to account for new technologies and differences in practice. And I was wondering if you have that sort of schedule in place, or if it's something that's kind of done piecemeal as things come along.
Yeah, so we have a blended approach. So we are very fortunate to have a curriculum department that it's a university department, but we have people assigned to us. And there is a schedule for new course development. There's a schedule for course revisions and textbook updates and things like that. And they kind of know like what a particular project will take them and what kind of capacity they have and budget they have for it. And so we actually negotiate that each year, like how many new classes we're going to have, how many major revisions we're going to do. And then we scout out to see if there's going to be a textbook change, or if we want to not just a edition change, but we want to get rid of a textbook. We had a contracts book that every student ever hated. And so we finally just gave up and got rid of it. And that was a lot of work to redo because we had everything keyed to that textbook. But we also have where we didn't really plan on a revision or a major one, but it just became apparent. A rule changed about expectations for the school, and we needed to have that course change to meet those expectations, or our own expectations change. And then we'll try to get that revision in. But if it's just little stuff, we could just do that on the fly, right? If it's the readings change, here and there, but that's about it. Those are kind of easy to take care of, but we do have a schedule. And so if we notice something's been sitting out there for a long time, or we know the law changed, then we'll put it on the schedule.
I'm curious, because you're in a virtual program, whether you have other competing responsibilities. I'm just sort of was imagining the unified curriculum and how that works in my context, where like there are values to me that people's deadlines are different, because that changes how people's responsibilities can kind of be distributed. And so I'm curious how that, whether you have other responsibilities as faculty, and if you do, assuming that you do, how you balance all of those with the uniform curriculum.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we have is our faculty do teach a little more probably than ABA faculty, because we're year round. So we're never really off. So they do teach a little more, probably, but then again, they're also getting the benefit of having some design done in advance for them. But we do have kind of like the ongoing, the minor revisions. Usually we just kind of absorb into our duties. If there's a major revision or a new course, then there's usually course relief for that, or over extra pay to make up for the effort. So if you're suddenly going from your 40-something hour week to a 50-something or 60-something hour week, then we'll accommodate that either by getting somebody to help out with the teaching, or by additional pay. Kind of depending on what the faculty member wants to do. but yeah, it can get really busy because sometimes things happen unexpectedly. And, you know, somehow we missed that new textbook was coming out, or we had to change our capstone courses because, you know, who even knows what's going to happen with the bar exam, that kind of thing. So we kind of have to deal with that. But yeah, it can get really busy, right? Because you're probably responsible for several different courses, and they might always happen in the order that you wish. But definitely we're going to consider workload and service load too, you know, all those committee assignments and things like that.
Thank you.
What system do you use to create the curriculum? And I'm mostly curious as if you offer some courses every other year, how do you keep track of that? And does your system actually keeps track of them for you to remind you that you should be offering that course again because it was skipped the year before?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're pretty lean. So I have like a master schedule, and courses are always offered at least once a year. Um, and they may not be taught if enough students don't sign up for it. But we'll offer it again. So I guess from that perspective, it's not too hard for me to track so much. Um, as far as when it was offered. I'm sorry, I forgot part of your question. Could you remind me?
Oh, are you using any particular system or software application to track or to create the curriculum?
Yeah. So actually we're using low tech. So humans and spreadsheets. So the curriculum team has records of when things were revised. Um, so they're keeping track of that. But yeah, actually, I publish to the students. You know, this is a spring, summer, winter class. You know, obviously some classes are offered every single term. Some are offered two or some one per year. Um, and we just keep on that schedule. So it's actually, at least the way we do things, it's pretty easy to keep track of.
Thank you.
Shaun, it's Greg Brandis. I want to take you back to John's question. Because there was one time at a time, new faculty members, new adjuncts had to make this scary presentation to the rest of the faculty to graduate from the training program. And I haven't talked to you about it for a while. I wonder if that's still going on or not.
Well, hi, Greg. And yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I'm so sad to tell you we don't do it exactly that way anymore. So what Greg's referring to is you would have to teach a class to whatever faculty member is available to show up. And some people were nice students and some were difficult students, the faculty members playing their roles. And so it was a really interesting launch into online teaching. And that live session is actually handled by our development, professional development department now. But what we do, Greg, is as a fill-in for that is I don't tell new faculty members when they come to the meeting until like a minute before the meeting that they're going to be called on to introduce themselves. So hopefully that's good enough.
Thank you. It was always quite a ritual.
Yeah, I remember it well.
I was curious how you divide up the work in terms of figuring out who's going to do, each of the different types of objects, like who's going to work on exercises, who's going to put together different quizzes. You mentioned subject matter experts, but I was wondering if you had someone who served as sort of like the course designer and then distributed work, or if it was by seniority or interest, or how you kind of divided that work up.
Yeah, that's great. So for the most part, usually we call them course leads. Usually the course lead kind of runs the show as far as a lot of times they just like to create the stuff themselves and then the curriculum developer will help them make it real. But so it's more a question of if there's a lot of times if there's another full-time person that also has a big presence in that course, then a lot of times they'll just negotiate amongst themselves who's doing what. Or if there's a adjunct faculty member that really would like to, change something about the course and volunteers to do that, that's fine. So it's pretty informal unless it's a huge lift. Or just somebody really needs the help. I just recently redesigned a class we call Modern Law Practice that has a lot of practical role playing, emotional intelligence, skills type stuff in it. Um, and I was able to have somebody who had a really good background in professional responsibility do that piece of it, plus a couple other things she's really good at. It kind of took the load off of me, without her having to take it all on either. So you see, it's pretty informal for us. And I should say too, for the writing department, they'll actually have meetings and people volunteer if they want. It's a little easier because they have more sections, right? Because they're smaller sections. So there's more people to spread the work around.
Any other questions or comments? All right, none in the room? Unless you have anything else, Shaun, thank you so much.
Thank you. I sure appreciate the invitation, and I hope everybody has a great conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.